The coffee hit her face like a slap, hot, bitter, public. In that instant, the first-class cabin froze, every passenger watching in stunned silence. They saw a rookie flight attendant humiliated by a man who believed he ruled the skies. But what they didn't know was this. She wasn't just another attendant. She was Naomi Carter, daughter of a trailblazing black CEO and secretly one of the highest-ranking executives at Aviora Airlines. For 3 months, Naomi lived under a false name, enduring insults, coded orders, and the quiet cruelty of a system built to favor some and humiliate others. She smiled, she served, she endured, but behind her calm eyes, every injustice was being recorded. Every slight, every accidental omission, every moment passengers of color were treated as less. Why did she risk everything to go undercover? What hidden network of discrimination was she about to expose? And when the moment finally came, who would stand with her and who would fall? Stay with us, because this is not just a story about one woman on a plane. It is about justice, dignity, and a reckoning at 35,000 feet. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because you won't want to miss how this flight changes everything. The coffee didn't spill. It struck, hot, bitter, deliberate. The splash hit my face with the sharpness of a slap, dripping down my pressed white blouse, staining it in a single cruel instant. The first-class cabin gasped as if they'd witnessed a mid-air collision. Papers rustled, tablets froze mid-scroll, eyes widened in disbelief. For a moment, the aircraft seemed to tilt, not from turbulence, but from silence. The hum of the engines was steady, yet the air inside felt cold, cut through by the sound of one man's laughter. You should watch where you're going. Rookie. Mark Reynolds sneered, holding the silver pot of coffee like a trophy. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his salt and pepper hair slicked perfectly back as if he had rehearsed this performance. His smirk wasn't private. It was staged, designed for the audience in first class. He wanted them to see me humiliated. I stood there, blinking against the burn on my cheek, my tray trembling only slightly in my hands. But I didn't shout. I didn't curse. I didn't run. I simply smiled, a quiet, measured curve of my lips that said everything his smirk never could. Because in 37 seconds, the game would change. The coffee wasn't an accident. I knew that the moment it hit my skin, his arm hadn't slipped, his grip hadn't faltered. He had poured it, intentional, sharp, cruel. And the passengers saw it too. Some averted their eyes quickly, afraid to be drawn in. Others lingered, confusion etched into their faces as if wondering whether they should intervene. But no one moved. They never did. "Apologize to the gentleman in 2A, Mark barked, as if my clumsiness had nearly scalded a paying customer. His voice carried through the cabin, rough with authority, certain of obedience. The man in 2A, a silver-haired businessman in a pinstripe suit, shook his head softly. "I don't think he began." But Mark cut him off with a raised hand. "She's new, still learning how to handle premium service. Isn't that right? Williams. The name he spat wasn't mine, but the one stitched onto the badge pinned to my soaked blouse. My alias, my mask. Yes," I said quietly. My voice was steady, even as my collar clung wet against my skin. I reached for a linen napkin, dabbed at my cheek with calm precision, then turned to the passenger with both hands open, offering him a clean towel. "I'm very sorry for the disruption, sir. Please let me know if there's anything I can do to make your flight more comfortable." The man accepted the towel awkwardly, glancing between me and Mark. His eyes softened. His voice dropped to a whisper meant only for me. "It's not your fault." I gave him the faintest nod of gratitude, then turned back toward the galley as Mark's stare bore into me like a predator watching its prey. I didn't flinch. Behind the safety of the curtain, I finally exhaled. My hands trembled not from fear, but from restraint. My heart was calm, controlled, trained for this. 3 months. That's how long I had worn this uniform. 3 months of smiling through backhanded comments, enduring condescension disguised as humor, and swallowing the bitter taste of discrimination as if it were just another in-flight beverage. 3 months of watching Mark Reynolds rule this cabin like a kingdom in the sky, where only certain passengers were treated like royalty, and now, with 1 pot of coffee, he'd given me exactly what I needed a moment. A public, undeniable moment. I pressed a dry cloth to my blouse, watching the stain spread like a map across fabric. I thought of every report I had read, every complaint tucked away in corporate drawers, dismissed as exaggerations or misunderstandings. And now, here it was, in the open air of a pressurized cabin, visible to everyone. Through the narrow gap in the curtain, I caught sight of a woman seated in 3D. She was black, mid-50s, diamond status pin glinting on her lapel. She had seen it all. Our eyes met briefly, and she gave me a small, deliberate nod. She didn't know who I really was, but she understood. She knew I hadn't bowed, hadn't lashed out. She knew I was holding the line, because this was never about a single insult or one arrogant man with a coffee pot. This was about a system, a culture, and it was about to collapse. 15 minutes later, service resumed. Mark moved down the aisle with his trademark charm, calling certain passengers by name, asking about their golf handicaps, their portfolios, their children at Ivy League schools. He laughed easily with them, leaning just close enough to make them feel special. But when he reached row 2C, where a young black entrepreneur sat with his laptop open, Mark didn't even glance at the name on his manifest. "Drink?" he asked flatly, already turning away before the man could answer. I caught the passenger's eye, his brow furrowed, his lips pressed tight. His gaze shifted toward me, silent but loud enough. "Is this how you treat all of your elite customers?" I gave him a discreet nod and mouthed, "I'll return." Mark didn't notice. He never noticed those he didn't value. I retreated to the galley once more, heart steady, fingers flexing with the patience of someone who had spent months preparing for this. Every second was evidence. Every exchange was a thread in the web I was spinning, and somewhere deep inside, beneath the calm smile and the wet fabric clinging to my skin, a fire simmered. This wasn't about coffee. This was about the reckoning to come. The cabin had returned to its rhythm, or at least that was how it looked from the outside. Glasses clinked gently as Mark Reynolds continued his flawless performance, serving with exaggerated charm to those he considered worthy of his attention. But beneath the surface, the air was thick. Passengers shifted in their seats, unsure if they had really seen what they thought they had seen. The truth was that they had. They had seen hot coffee strike my face. They had heard the sharp cruelty in Mark's voice when he demanded that I apologize. And they had felt the way silence swallowed the space afterward, like a sudden drop in cabin pressure. Yet no one spoke. It was always the same. Injustice in the air had a way of disguising itself as order. People convinced themselves it was none of their business. They told themselves that maybe they had misunderstood, or maybe the person being humiliated had somehow invited it. That was how power survived. Not through its loudest acts, but through the quiet compliance of those who chose to look away. I kept my posture straight as I moved down the aisle, offering drinks with the kind of steady poise that comes only from years of practice. I poured champagne into a crystal flute for a banker in 1B. I handed a Diet Coke to a woman in 2F. My hands did not shake, my smile did not falter, but inside, my thoughts were sharp as blades. 3 rows back, the woman in 3D still held my gaze every chance she got. She was quiet, reserved, but her presence anchored me. She had witnessed it all, and unlike the others, she didn't avert her eyes. She didn't bury herself in her phone or sink deeper into her leather seat. She watched, and in watching, she testified silently that I was not imagining what had happened. I carried a tray of mixed nuts past her seat, offering them with the same polite tone I gave every passenger. She accepted with a small smile, and under her breath she whispered, "You handled that with grace." I nodded faintly. It was only 3 words, but they steadied something inside me. Grace. That was what Mark hated. He expected fear, shame, or angry defiance he could twist into insubordination. What he never expected was composure. Grace was dangerous because it made cruelty look small. As I worked, my mind split itself in 2. On the outside, I was Kennedy Williams, a rookie attendant still trying to earn her footing. On the inside, I was Naomi Carter, daughter of Evelyn Carter, federal judge and civil rights icon. And, more than that, I was the undercover investigator who had chosen to bury her title, her privilege, and her authority in order to see the truth from the inside. But the weight of silence pressed against me. Each passenger's refusal to intervene felt heavier than the last. Even the businessman in 2A who had whispered his support avoided further eye contact now, as if ashamed that he had not done more. I wondered what my mother would say if she had been there. She would remind me that silence was not the absence of choice, but the presence of complicity. She would tell me that silence built empires of injustice brick by brick, until those inside could no longer breathe. As I walked back to the galley, the curtain swayed closed behind me, and I let out a long breath. My reflection in the stainless steel panel stared back at me. My cheek was still faintly red, the blouse still stained, but my eyes were steady. I pulled a napkin from the drawer and wiped the edge of a service tray, more for the motion than for the need. My body moved on autopilot, the habits of training carrying me forward, while my thoughts drifted. Was I doing enough? Was watching and recording patterns really enough to dismantle what I had seen? Or was I hiding behind my own silence, convincing myself that evidence required endurance, when in truth endurance felt dangerously close to complicity? The curtain rustled, and another attendant, Rachel Kim, peeked in. She was young, sharp, with dark eyes that missed very little. She held a stack of used glasses in her hands. "Rough morning," she said softly. I gave a neutral smile. First class isn't always smooth. Rachel hesitated, as if she wanted to say more, then decided against it. She dropped the glasses in the sink, rinsed them quickly, and slipped back out. Her silence wasn't cruel, just careful. Everyone calculated what they could afford to risk. I leaned against the counter, closing my eyes for just a second. In those moments, my mind replayed the sound of the coffee striking fabric, the hiss of Mark's voice, and the frozen stillness of the passengers. I replayed it, not as memory, but as evidence. Every detail mattered. When I stepped back into the cabin, I noticed the young man in 2C watching me closely. He was in his early 30s, maybe a tech entrepreneur, judging by the sleek laptop and the restless energy of his fingers tapping against the armrest. His gaze followed me with curiosity, almost like he was testing whether I would acknowledge what he had seen. As I passed, he leaned slightly toward me and whispered, "Does this happen a lot?" The question caught me off guard. I glanced at him quickly, then shook my head faintly. "Just enjoy your flight, sir." But the truth lingered between us. Yes, it did happen a lot. Not just here, not just with Mark, but across countless flights, countless routes, in 1,000 small ways that were invisible to those who weren't looking for them. I moved to the back of the cabin, and as I did, I caught Mark watching me. His eyes were narrow, sharp, calculating. He didn't need to say a word. His stare alone was a warning. He knew I hadn't reacted the way he expected. He knew I hadn't folded, and that unsettled him. The hum of the engines deepened as we cruised at altitude. Service slowed, the cabin settled. Passengers reclined, some drifting into light sleep, others absorbed in their screens. The energy of the earlier confrontation faded, at least on the surface. But inside me, it burned brighter than ever. Injustice had a sound. It wasn't always a shout or a slur. Sometimes it was silence. The silence of a cabin full of people who pretended not to see. The silence of a crew that looked the other way. The silence of a system that allowed people like Mark Reynolds to reign unchecked for decades. I gathered a stack of folded blankets and began distributing them, one by one. When I reached 3D, the woman with the diamond pin took hers with steady hands. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "Don't let him break you." Her words pierced deeper than the coffee had, because they were not just encouragement. They were recognition, and in that moment, I felt less alone. Back in the galley, I scribbled a brief note into the small leather-bound journal I kept tucked in my apron pocket. It was my private log, a duplicate of the digital file I maintained for evidence. Today, I wrote, "Mark escalated, public humiliation in front of cabin, witnesses present in 2A, 3D, and 2C, no intervention, silent compliance." I closed the book, slid it back into my pocket, and straightened my posture. The flight was only halfway through. The journey ahead was long, but I knew something had shifted. Mark had revealed his hand too soon, too dramatically, and in doing so, he had given me something more valuable than comfort. He had given me clarity. The cabin may have gone silent, but I was listening, and I would remember everything. 3 months earlier, Naomi Carter sat in an office that most people would have called untouchable. From the 58th floor of the Carter Aviation Tower, she could see the city skyline glittering under the afternoon sun. Jets carved white trails across the horizon, each one a silent reminder of the empire she had inherited and redefined. But Naomi wasn't looking at the view. She was staring at a manila folder on her desk, its corners bent as though it had been passed too many times through too many reluctant hands. The folder was unmarked except for a single note clipped to the front in neat handwriting. Sensitive. Internal eyes only. She opened it for the 100th time. Page after page of passenger complaints, names removed for anonymity but stories raw and painfully clear. A woman described being ignored despite her diamond status pin gleaming on her jacket. A businessman recalled asking for water 3 times while his white seatmate was served twice without asking. Another wrote that a senior flight attendant had leaned down and whispered, "Enjoy it while you can. Not everyone belongs up here." The stories varied, but the pattern did not. Subtle discrimination in the premium cabins, polished cruelty dressed up as professionalism. Naomi had read them until her eyes blurred, but the sting remained sharp every time. She closed the folder slowly and leaned back in her leather chair. She was 35, the youngest executive in the airline's history, the daughter of a civil rights judge who had fought battles in courtrooms long before Naomi was born. She had carried her family's legacy into the corporate world, rising through mergers and restructures, proven herself in rooms filled with doubters. Her promotion to executive vice president had been hailed as a triumph, but triumph was meaningless if the culture beneath it was rotting. A knock at the door broke her concentration. Neil, her trusted assistant, stepped in with a tablet. His dark eyes studied her carefully. "Board pre-brief in 20 minutes. Want me to pull the updated quarterly projections?" "In a minute," Naomi murmured, tapping the folder with her index finger. Neil tilted his head. "Still reading that, still hearing it," she corrected. "You ever get the sense that something's broken, but too quiet to notice unless you listen differently?" He gave a small smile, like an engine that hums wrong. Naomi's lips curved faintly, exactly like that. After Neil left, she swiveled her chair toward the window, but her reflection was all she saw. The reports had pierced deeper than profit margins or efficiency scores ever could. The numbers in quarterly reviews were soaring. Carter Aviation was the envy of the industry. Yet none of that mattered if customers were boarding flights only to be reminded that their skin tone dictated the service they received. That night, Naomi sat alone in her penthouse kitchen. The city glowed outside, but her glass of Merlot sat untouched on the counter. The folder lay open before her, its pages spread like a crime scene. She considered the options. She could issue another memo about inclusion. She could hire a consulting firm to design a training program, film a glossy video about respect and dignity in the skies. But she knew the truth, none of that would touch the real infection. Because truth had a habit of hiding itself the moment it felt observed. She thought of her mother, Judge Evelyn Carter, who once told her, "Injustice doesn't tremble at speeches, it trembles at witnesses." That was when the idea took root. Not a press release, not an internal audit, witnessing from the inside. The next morning, Naomi requested a meeting with her general counsel, Elise Tanaka. Elise arrived in a crisp navy suit, a woman whose calm precision had steered Naomi through mergers and lawsuits alike. Naomi slid the folder across the table. "I want to go undercover." Elise blinked. "Excuse me, as a flight attendant. Training, uniform, everything. No one on the board can know. No vice presidents, only you and Neil." Elise leaned forward, brows furrowed. "Naomi, you are the executive vice president of this airline. Do you realize the optics, the liability? If anyone discovers this, that's exactly why it has to be airtight." Naomi interrupted. Her voice was calm, but the steel in it left no room for argument. "Passengers are being treated differently based on race and class. That is a cancer. Elise. And cancer doesn't show up on PowerPoint slides." She pushed another folder across the table. Inside was a draft identity, prepared weeks earlier when the idea had first sparked. Kennedy Williams, background in hospitality, mid-career switch, clean digital footprint, no traceable ties to Naomi Carter. "I'll train in Dallas, Naomi continued. "Standard flight attendant program. No shortcuts. No one can suspect." Elise exhaled slowly, her eyes scanning Naomi's face. "You're gambling a lot." "I'm saving more," Naomi replied. Weeks later, the transformation was complete. Gone was the tailored Armani suit and the pearl necklace her mother had given her. Gone was the custom leather briefcase that had followed her into every boardroom. In their place, a navy polyester uniform, a generic ID badge, and a plain black carry-on. The woman in the mirror was no longer Naomi Carter, aviation executive. She was Kennedy Williams, a rookie flight attendant with a polite smile and no past worth mentioning. The training center in Dallas smelled of coffee and new carpet. Rows of recruits lined up alphabetically, their nervous chatter filling the auditorium. Naomi, now Kennedy, stood among them, clutching her service manual. "In this business," the trainer barked, "half of you won't make it to graduation. Some because you won't be good enough, others because you won't want it badly enough. Either way, the door behind you is always open." No one moved. Naomi exhaled softly. Here we go. The first week was brutal. Emergency drills, evacuation protocols, safety demonstrations. She learned to disarm a door in under 10 seconds, to perform CPR at 35,000 feet, to manage a lithium battery fire without panicking. She memorized FAA codes late into the night, her eyes burning but her determination steady. Among the recruits were personalities as varied as the passengers they would one day serve. Tammy, a former teacher with a warm laugh; Jordan, a veteran with quiet strength; Sophia, fresh out of college, bursting with energy. Naomi fit with none of them, yet all of them respected her. She was polite, helpful, but always slightly distant. The instructors noticed her composure. During a door operation simulation, Regina Winters, the lead trainer, narrowed her eyes. "That was smooth. You sure you've never done this before?" Naomi smiled faintly. Just good muscle memory. But inside, she knew Regina's suspicion was dangerous. By the end of the second week, Naomi had perfected her disguise. She was Kennedy Williams, 35, a former hotel manager starting over. She laughed at casual jokes, shared meals in the cafeteria, and blended into the group. Yet, at night, in her small rented apartment, she removed the mask and recorded voice memos to Elise. Every detail, every observation, every tiny fracture in the system was logged. Graduation day arrived. 17 out of 28 recruits made it through. Kennedy Williams received her assignment premium routes out of Atlanta under the supervision of Mark Reynolds. Naomi's heart tightened at the name. Mark Reynolds. His file had appeared in multiple complaint reports, yet always he slipped through internal audits unscathed. On paper, he was a star. In whispers, he was a tyrant. Now she would stand in his cabin. That night, Naomi laid out her uniform on the bed, polished shoes, crisp scarf, regulation lipstick. She stared at the reflection in the mirror. She no longer saw the executive who commanded boardrooms. She saw a woman stepping into shadows to find the rot. Only in darkness could she see the truth, and she was ready. The days at the Dallas Training Center blurred together in a rhythm of discipline and exhaustion. Wake at dawn, drill until your muscles tremble, study until your eyelids refuse to stay open, sleep in the narrow silence of temporary apartments before repeating it all over again. For most recruits, the process was overwhelming. For Naomi Carter, living under the name Kennedy Williams, It was familiar in its relentlessness. She had endured harsher schedules when she was climbing the ranks in corporate law, and before that, during the sleepless years of her MBA program. But this was different. This was physical, tactile, embodied. There was no boardroom polish to hide behind, no luxury of delegating responsibility. If she failed here, she failed with her own hands. Emergency training sessions took place in a cavernous hangar filled with mock aircraft doors and inflated evacuation slides. Recruits practiced over and over until their palms blistered. Naomi's movements were precise, controlled, always efficient. The trainers noticed. During one session, as she secured a life vest on a plastic mannequin, Regina Winters hovered nearby, arms folded. "You learn fast," Regina said flatly. Naomi kept her voice light. "I guess hospitality prepared me for details." Regina studied her with eyes that seemed to pierce deeper than Naomi was comfortable with. Then she gave a short nod and moved on. But Naomi felt the weight of that stare long after. At lunch, the recruits gathered in the cafeteria, swapping stories about their old lives. Tammy laughed about her years teaching kindergarten, how wrangling 25-year-olds had prepared her better than any manual. Jordan spoke quietly about serving overseas, how flight attendant duty felt almost peaceful compared to what he had seen. Sophia gushed about the excitement of traveling the world, eyes sparkling with the kind of energy that made her seem untouchable. Naomi listened more than she spoke. She shared enough to maintain her cover, a few stories about long nights managing a hotel, about difficult guests who complained over the thread count of their sheets, but she never gave too much. Her silence earned her a reputation among the others, mysterious, polished, a little too perfect. "Sometimes I think you've already been in charge of something big," Jordan said one afternoon as they picked at grilled chicken in the cafeteria. Naomi lifted an eyebrow. "What makes you say that? You don't talk like someone starting over. You carry yourself like someone who knows where she belongs." Naomi smiled faintly. "Maybe I just got good at faking it." He shrugged, but his eyes lingered on her. Jordan was observant, too observant. Instructors tested the recruits constantly, not just in skill, but in composure. Kyle, a young trainer with too much hair gel and a taste for humiliation, singled Naomi out during beverage service drills. "Williams, you're over-prepared," he said loudly to the group. "We don't want showboats here. This isn't a solo mission. Some of you need to remember that teamwork matters more than personal glory." The words were meant to cut. Naomi smiled politely and nodded, offering no argument. Inside, she noted the tone. Humiliation disguised as instruction. She had seen the tactic before, in boardrooms, in politics, in history. It was the oldest trick in the book: knock someone down before they rise too high. That evening, Naomi sat alone in her small apartment, jotting notes in her leather journal. "Today, Kyle undermined me in front of the group, observed jealousy, possible bias against older female recruits, logged." Her pen lingered on the page. Sometimes the hardest part of undercover work wasn't the cruelty you endured. It was the silence you had to maintain in response. She wanted to defend herself, to remind Kyle that excellence was not arrogance, but her role required patience. Witnessing meant restraint. The following week, the recruits practiced evacuation under simulated turbulence. The cabin mock-up shook violently as instructors shouted commands. Naomi guided her row of mannequins with steady authority, her voice firm but calm. "Step forward. Hold the rail. Jump. Slide. Run." Her clarity cut through the chaos. For a moment, she forgot she was pretending to be Kennedy Williams. She sounded like herself, like Naomi Carter, the woman who had commanded boardrooms with the same tone of conviction. When the drill ended, Regina called her aside. "You ever flown before?" Regina asked, too casually. Naomi shook her head. "Just as a passenger, I like being prepared." Regina studied her, lips pressed thin. "Prepared isn't the same as natural. But you almost look natural." Naomi forced a laugh. "Guess I'm a fast learner." Regina didn't laugh. She let Naomi go, but suspicion lingered in her gaze. Later that night, Naomi whispered into her secure recorder, "Regina Winters suspects me." Her eyes tracked too closely. "She watches the way I hold a tray, the way I command a drill. I may need to adjust, be less polished." The next morning, Naomi deliberately stumbled during beverage service practice, spilling a mock soda across a tray. Tammy helped her mop it up, laughing. Finally, "You're human." The group relaxed around her after that. The stumble had bought her cover, but Naomi's mind remained alert. Every move was calculated. Graduation day approached quickly. Out of 28 recruits, only 17 remained. The others had dropped out or been cut for mistakes. Those who stayed had bonded into fragile groups. Naomi had friends of a kind: Tammy with her open warmth, Jordan with his quiet strength, Sophia with her boundless energy. But she kept a distance none of them could cross. On the final day, as names were read and assignments given, Naomi held her breath. "Kennedy Williams," Regina announced, eyes locking briefly on hers. "Premium routes, Atlanta to New York. Under the supervision of Senior Flight Attendant Mark Reynolds." Naomi's stomach tightened. She had seen his name before, buried in complaint reports that mysteriously went nowhere. A pattern of passengers describing subtle dismissals, colder service, clipped tones reserved for people of color. A man praised by mid-level managers for efficiency, protected by spotless performance reviews. Now she would serve directly under him. That evening, Naomi returned to her apartment and laid her uniform across the bed. Her shoes were polished, her scarf folded neatly, her name badge shining with the false identity she carried. She stared at herself in the mirror, the reflection of a woman who was both more and less than she appeared. This was the moment she had prepared for. The training was complete. The stage was set. Tomorrow, she would step into Mark Reynolds' cabin. Tomorrow, the real test would begin. Naomi placed her hand on the uniform. It felt heavy with more than fabric. It felt heavy with history, with expectation, with the quiet weight of every passenger who had written into that folder on her desk 3 months earlier. She whispered softly, almost like a prayer, "I will see it all." And then she turned out the light. The crew lounge in Atlanta buzzed with the sleepy chatter of attendants preparing for early morning departures. The smell of burnt coffee clung to the air, mixing with the faint tang of jet fuel seeping in from the tarmac. Naomi Carter, dressed neatly in her Navy uniform, stepped through the frosted doors with her regulation carry-on rolling quietly behind her. Her badge read Kennedy Williams, rookie, anonymous, forgettable, just the way it needed to be. At the sign-in station stood Mark Reynolds. He was taller than she expected, with salt and pepper hair combed back into perfect submission. His posture radiated the kind of confidence born from decades of impunity. His uniform was immaculate. His name badge gleamed, and his eyes were sharp with the assumption of command. "Williams," he said flatly, acknowledging her presence without warmth. Yes, Naomi replied with a professional smile. Reporting for Flight 1842 to New York. Mark gave a single nod. First class with me. Behind him, the rest of the team gathered. Diane Murray, a woman in her 40s with lips pressed into permanent disapproval. Sandra Patel, younger, quieter, with a softness in her eyes that hinted at kindness but also caution. And Michael Levine, wiry and distracted, sipping from a thermos as though caffeine were the only thing keeping him upright. Mark did not introduce them. He simply snapped, "Briefing, now." They gathered around a round table. Mark rattled off assignments with military precision. Diane and Sandra, main cabin. Michael, galley, Williams, you are with me up front. Diane frowned. I thought I was rotating into first this month. Schedule changed. Mark replied without looking up from his tablet. Orders from above. Diane's eyes cut toward Naomi, narrowing with resentment. Naomi held her posture steady, her expression calm. Inside, she noted it all. Even before the flight began, the hierarchy was already clear. Mark continued. Focus on our priorities. Regulars are marked with stars. Handle with care. Naomi studied the manifest he passed her. The stars were almost exclusively beside white, older, male passengers. The others were unmarked. Asian surnames, black surnames, Middle Eastern surnames, invisible loyalty. Naomi gave a crisp nod. Understood. But inside, she was already recording. Boarding began shortly after. Mark stood at the entrance of the cabin like a king greeting subjects. His smile widened for the favored passengers. Mr. Livingston, good to see you back on the Monday run. Scotch as usual. He touched shoulders, hung coats personally, laughed as though they were old friends. Then came Dr. Regina Lewis, an African-American woman with poise and quiet confidence. Her diamond pin glinted on her lapel, proof of years of loyalty to the airline. Mark's tone dropped instantly. 2 Ds on your right, he said. No name, no smile, no eye contact. Naomi stepped forward with deliberate calm. Good morning, Dr. Lewis. May I offer you a pre-departure beverage? We have champagne or a signature morning cocktail. Regina blinked, surprised. Then she smiled. Orange juice, please. Thank you. Naomi brought it promptly, offering it with both hands, the way she had seen her mother offer dignity in court, simple, intentional, undeniable. Mark's sharp glance sliced toward her. Let's keep service moving, he muttered under his breath. Of course, Naomi replied softly, but she saw the flicker in Dr. Lewis's eyes, recognition, solidarity, a silent understanding that she was seen. The flight lifted off smoothly. Service began. Mark took the aisle with theatrical energy, addressing favored passengers by name, inquiring about their golf handicaps, their portfolios, their children's private schools. His tone was warm, his gestures exaggerated. When he reached row 3, however, his demeanor shifted. A Latino businessman sat in 3B, his diamond pin gleaming faintly in the cabin light. Mark barely glanced at him. Drink, he asked, already turning away. The man hesitated. Yes, I'll have. But Mark was gone before the sentence finished. The passenger looked up at Naomi as if to ask, Is this normal? She gave a discreet nod and mouthed, I'll return shortly. Mark did not notice. He never noticed the ones he did not value. Naomi moved quietly, making her way to the galley. Diane passed her with a smirk too sharp to be friendly. Rough morning, she said sweetly. First class isn't for everyone. you know." Naomi's voice stayed neutral. "Thanks for the advice." Diane leaned closer. "Word is, Mark's requesting someone else on his team next month. Maybe someone more traditional." Naomi raised a brow. "Traditional." "You know," Diane said, lowering her voice, "someone who understands the clientele." She patted Naomi's shoulder with mock sympathy before gliding away. Naomi stood in the galley for a moment, her jaw tight, her fingers flexing against the tray. She thought of her mother's words again. Silence is not neutrality. Silence is complicity. But she forced herself to stay calm. Witnessing required patience. Documentation required restraint. She returned to the aisle with a warm towel, approaching the man in 3B discreetly. "Apologies for the delay, sir. What would you like to drink?" His shoulders relaxed slightly. "Red wine, please." She poured it carefully, offering it with both hands. He gave a small nod of gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered. Naomi smiled faintly. "My pleasure." Mark's gaze tracked her every movement. She could feel it like heat against her back. He was watching not just for mistakes, but for defiance. Meal service began an hour later. Naomi offered on trays with equal warmth to each passenger. No hierarchy in her tone. Mark, meanwhile, delivered meals with calculated subtlety. White executives received full explanations of the menu, accompanied by witty comments. Passengers of color were presented plates with clipped efficiency. When Naomi discreetly offered a vegetarian option to a South Asian passenger in 4A, Mark intercepted. "Inventory is limited," he said curtly. "Stick to the plan. Williams." Naomi held his gaze for a fraction of a second, her eyes steady. Then she nodded once. Understood. But inside, she logged every detail. By the time the plane descended into New York, the pattern was undeniable. Refills came slower for certain passengers. Requests were forgotten. Napkins delivered with less care. Smiles dimmed like lights reserved for others. As passengers disembarked, Dr. Lewis in 2D paused briefly. She turned to Naomi and said softly, "Thank you for treating me with dignity." Naomi's throat tightened. "Always, ma'am," when the cabin was empty. Mark dismissed the crew with a casual wave. "Debrief later, same assignments tomorrow." Naomi started toward the exit, but his voice stopped her. "Williams." She turned slowly. "You've got potential," Mark said. His smile was thin, calculated, composed, sharp. "First class needs that. Just remember, don't overthink the rhythm. We all serve the same airline, but not every passenger deserves the same performance." Naomi met his gaze with careful neutrality. Understood. But inside, her resolve hardened. Respect wasn't conditional, dignity wasn't optional, and she would prove it. That night, in her crew apartment. Naomi opened the encrypted app Elise had built for her. She logged the day's details, meticulously starred manifests, coded language, subtle patterns of bias, passenger interactions, crew complicity. Then a message popped up from an unknown sender, one line, "Nice debut." "Kennedy, welcome to the real Carter Airlines." Attached was a grainy photo of her, pouring wine in first class. The angle was wrong for a passenger. It was from the galley. Someone was documenting her. The next morning, Naomi woke before her alarm, her heart steady but her thoughts sharp. The image from the night before lingered on her tablet, a grainy photograph of her pouring wine in first class. The angle was impossible for a passenger. It had come from the galley, from someone inside the crew. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed, staring at the dim light filtering through the blinds. Someone was watching her, documenting her, feeding evidence to a shadow she could not yet see. For a moment, she let the thought sink into her bones. Then she straightened her shoulders. Pressure did not break her. It shaped her. At crew check-in, the atmosphere was tighter than before. Mark Reynolds stood at the briefing table, his smile sharp, his tone clipped. Diane hovered nearby, already smirking as if she knew a secret. Sandra stood off to the side, hands clasped, her eyes darting nervously between faces. Mark opened the briefing with a quick scan of the manifest. 2A and 2B, returning VIPs. You give them your best. 3D downgrade due to aircraft change. Do not overservice. Keep them quiet. Naomi's gaze flicked down the page. Seat 3D, Dr. Malcolm Hart, African American, mid-50s, diamond status, neurosurgeon, loyal to Carter Airlines for over 15 years. Mark's designation downgrade. No notes about his loyalty, no acknowledgement of his title. Just a label designed to justify less care. Naomi spoke evenly. He is diamond status. Should we be offering pre-departure choice? Mark did not look up. Not when they are on a comped upgrade. Even if they are loyalists, consistency matters. Naomi pressed lightly. Otherwise it feels Mark turned his head slowly, his eyes cold. Do you want to run this briefing? Williams' Naomi kept her tone calm. No, just asking for clarity. His smile was thin, tight. We are consistent. We reward legacy, and we know who built this airline. The words landed heavy in the room. Diane nodded almost imperceptibly. Sandra lowered her gaze. Michael pretended to study the coffee in his thermos. Naomi remained still, inside. Her resolve sharpened. Respect was not a privilege handed to a chosen few. It was the baseline of service. She would not bend that truth, no matter how many stares tried to silence her. Boarding began in the usual rhythm. Mark greeted white executives like old friends, his voice booming with cheer. Mr. Kepler, welcome back. Scotch on the rocks, as always. Mrs. Denton, your preferred Perrier is waiting. He beamed and leaned close, making them feel cherished. When Dr. Hart stepped forward, Mark barely lifted his eyes. 3D, left side, no name, no warmth, just numbers and silence. Naomi moved forward with calm precision. Welcome back to Carter Airlines. Dr. Hart, may I offer you a pre-departure beverage? We have a citrus spritzer this morning. Or chilled, sparkling water if you prefer. Dr. Hart looked up, startled by the recognition. He gave a small smile. I will take the spritzer. Thank you. Naomi nodded. Of course. She returned to the galley to prepare it. Mark was waiting for her. He blocked the counter, his voice sharp but low. That seat was a downgrade. No personalized service. Naomi's gaze was steady. He is a diamond member. Respect is not conditional. Mark leaned closer, his breath laced with coffee. Do not forget who you are talking to. Passengers were watching now. Naomi saw them from the corner of her eye. A man in 2A glanced over. A woman in 4C paused with her phone half raised. Attention was building like static in the cabin air. Naomi lowered her voice, matching his tone. And do not forget who you are being watched by. She stepped past him smoothly, poured the spritzer, and placed it gently on Dr. Hart's tray. Here you are, sir. Fresh. Doctor. Hart's eyes softened. Thank you, he said quietly. Mark did not stop her, but the silence that followed was colder than turbulence. Meal service began halfway through the flight. Naomi moved with deliberate grace, offering options evenly, her voice calm and warm for every passenger. Mark simmered, his charm cracking under the weight of his own anger. Diane whispered sharp comments to Sandra about rookies getting reckless. Sandra hesitated, glancing at Naomi with quiet uncertainty. The tension snapped during the meal. Dr. Hart requested an additional bread roll. Mark, passing nearby, leaned down. "Sorry, we are out." Naomi blinked. She had counted the rolls herself. There were extras. Without a word, she went to the galley, retrieved one, warmed it gently, and returned. "Here you are, Dr. Hart," she said with a smile, fresh from the oven. Dr. Hart's gratitude was visible in his eyes. "Thank you," he murmured. Mark moved fast. He stopped in the aisle, towering over her. Williams, galley, now. Passengers froze. Forks hovered above plates. The cabin went silent except for the drone of the engines. Naomi held her ground. "I am serving a guest. You are out of line," Mark hissed. "I am doing my job," Naomi replied calmly, her voice carrying just enough for passengers to hear. And then a new voice cut through the tension. "Excuse me." A woman in seat. 2C stood, her tone clear and calm. She wore an elegant gray pantsuit, her dark hair neatly pinned, her posture commanding without effort. "I would like to speak with both of you," she said. Mark straightened. "Ma'am, is there an issue?" The woman pulled a small card from her coat pocket and held it up. "Cassandra Ellis, Board of Directors, Special Committee on Ethics." The air left the cabin in a collective gasp. Mark's face paled. Naomi stayed perfectly still. Cassandra's gaze was sharp. "Ms. Williams, please continue your service. I have seen enough. Mr. Reynolds, galley, now." Mark's jaw tightened. He obeyed. "Inside the galley." Cassandra's tone dropped. "You just made a mistake, a visible one." Mark swallowed. "I did not realize, no." Cassandra interrupted. "You did not. That is the problem." She pulled a small notepad from her coat pocket and scribbled quickly. "You have been under informal review for 2 months. Multiple red flags, but we needed something overt. You just gave it to us." Mark's eyes darted toward the curtain. Sandra lingered nearby, frozen in place. Diane's lips were taut with shock. Michael pretended to be busy, his hands trembling slightly as he stacked trays. Cassandra closed the notepad and looked at Mark with calm finality. "We are done here." Naomi, meanwhile, continued her aisle duties with deliberate calm. She served drinks, cleared plates, smiled gently at passengers whose eyes now followed her with quiet respect. Dr. Hart gave her a nod, small but heavy with meaning. When the plane landed at JFK, Mark was asked to remain behind. Cassandra walked him off the plane without a word. Passengers whispered among themselves, their eyes wide with curiosity. Naomi gathered coats, offered farewells, her hands steady even as her pulse quickened. The tide had shifted. For the first time in weeks, she felt the faintest thread of momentum pulling in her direction. That evening in her crew apartment, Naomi opened her tablet to find a message waiting from Cassandra. "Next steps authorized, full audit, legal clearance pending, stay in place. They will panic now. And when they do, we catch everyone." Naomi leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. The plan was unfolding sooner than expected, but pressure had always been part of her design, and tonight She let herself feel it. Not fear, not relief, but the quiet satisfaction of a strategy that had finally drawn blood. By the time the sun rose over Atlanta 2 days later, the crew lounge was buzzing with a story that needed no introduction. Mark Reynolds, the untouchable senior attendant, had been escorted off a flight under the watchful eyes of passengers and crew. The official memo was clinical pending investigation, temporary suspension, but the ripple was anything but temporary. Diane sat rigid in her chair, her lips pressed so tightly together they looked bloodless. Sandra avoided eye contact, fiddling nervously with her crew badge. Michael stayed silent, sipping his thermos as though it could drown the tension in the room. Naomi walked in last, her uniform pressed, her expression calm, as if she had not noticed the storm swirling around her. Diane's voice cracked the silence. "So, you're still here." Naomi looked up slowly. "Good morning," Diane scoffed. "You must be proud of yourself, throwing good people under the bus for attention." Naomi's gaze was steady. Doing the right thing should not require applause or permission. Diane's eyes narrowed. "You think you know this world. You do not. First class isn't just about service. It is about balance, about knowing who belongs and who does not." Mark understood that. Naomi's jaw tightened, but her voice remained soft. "Respect does not ask who belongs. It gives dignity without conditions." Sandra shifted uneasily, her eyes flicking between them. Michael cleared his throat but said nothing. Before the argument could build, a supervisor entered with the day's assignments. Naomi was listed in first class again. Diane's face twisted with disgust, but she said nothing. The crew filed out quietly, tension heavy in the air. On the plane, Naomi worked with precision. She poured drinks, adjusted coats, smiled evenly at each passenger. Sandra mirrored her, cautious but watching closely, almost as if waiting for permission to choose a side. Diane, however, made her disdain clear. She brushed past Naomi with deliberate shoulders, slammed galley drawers harder than necessary, and whispered cutting remarks about rookies to passengers when she thought Naomi could not hear. Midway through the flight, a request came from a South Asian man in 2A. He asked politely for the vegetarian option he had booked in advance. Diane glanced at the manifest and shook her head. "Inventory is limited. You will have to take chicken." Naomi frowned. She had seen the tray during pre-flight checks. It was still in the galley. "Actually," she said calmly, "I can warm the vegetarian option. It was listed." Diane shot her a glare sharp enough to wound. "Do not contradict me in front of passengers." Naomi ignored the sting. She turned back to the man with a gentle smile. "One moment, sir." She returned with the vegetarian tray, plated neatly, presented with care. The passenger's eyes softened. "Thank you," he said warmly. Naomi nodded. "You deserve the service you were promised." Diane's lips pressed into a furious line. After landing, Naomi returned to her crew apartment to find an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed neatly. "You are not untouchable. No signature, no context, just threat." Her fingers tightened around the page. For a moment, she let herself feel the sting, the reminder that she was being watched, tracked, measured. Then she folded the note carefully and slipped it into her encrypted file. Evidence was evidence, even when wrapped in intimidation. The following day, retaliation escalated. Naomi was summoned to a small office in the operations wing at LaGuardia. A man in a gray suit and a woman with wire-rimmed glasses sat waiting. Their expressions were neutral, their posture rigid. "We have received a tip," the man said, not bothering with introductions. "Allegations that you have been accessing passenger records outside your assignment authority, sharing them off platform." The woman slid a folder across the table. Inside were fabricated screenshots, portal logs, falsified timestamps, messages that looked authentic but were not. Naomi studied them carefully. She recognized the coding style immediately. This was not random. It was crafted, deliberate. "Do you deny accessing these profiles?" the woman asked. Naomi lifted her eyes. Her voice was cool, steady. "I deny everything in this file. This data has been manipulated." The man raised an eyebrow. "Regardless, we will have to suspend your portal access while we investigate." "Understood," Naomi replied calmly. But inside, her pulse quickened, not from guilt, but from the sheer audacity of the move. This was no misunderstanding. It was sabotage. She left the office without protest. On the sidewalk outside, her phone buzzed. A message from Cassandra Ellis. "He planted the seed. Now he wants you to drown in it." Naomi's throat tightened. Rick Reynolds might have been grounded, but his reach was not. Someone was moving on his behalf. Someone inside. That night. Naomi encrypted a voice message to Elise Tanaka. "I have been framed. Fabricated logs. False emails. They want me terminated before this audit spreads." Elise's voice returned an hour later, calm but edged with fire. "Keep everything, every file, every word. Do not log back in until I say, if they escalate, this goes federal." Naomi closed her eyes. Her heart was steady again. She could endure attacks. What she could not allow was silence. 2 nights later, another envelope arrived at her apartment. This one carried no threat, only a single line. "You are not the only one watching. Some of us want change too." Attached was a photocopy of a service log. Discrepancies circled in red. Meal shortages, seat assignments, all pointing to a pattern. Naomi sat back slowly, the paper trembling in her hands. Someone inside had chosen to resist. Anonymous, cautious, but real. For the first time since the coffee struck her blouse, she felt something stronger than fire. Momentum. The following morning, she walked into the crew lounge with her head high. Diane's glare sliced across the room. Sandra gave her a small nod, almost imperceptible but unmistakable. Michael looked away. Shame etched into the lines of his face. The balance was shifting. Retaliation had begun, but so had resistance. The first time Naomi saw Ashley Monroe, it was on a Monday morning flight out of Atlanta. Ashley's presence was disarming at first glance. She was young, bright-eyed, her ponytail perfectly sleek, her smile wide enough to light up the gate. She radiated the kind of optimism that new recruits often carried before the reality of long flights and difficult passengers dulled their edges. "First time on the A-team," Ashley said cheerfully during the pre-flight briefing, clutching her crew tablet like it was a lifeline. "I am so excited to learn from all of you." Mark was gone, but his shadow lingered. Diane sat stiff and unfriendly, while Sandra kept her gaze down, cautious as ever. Michael muttered something under his breath about rookies slowing down the flow. Naomi, standing calm in her crisp uniform, offered Ashley a polite nod. "Welcome aboard." Ashley smiled too brightly, almost rehearsed. "Thanks. I hope I can keep up." At first, Naomi allowed herself to believe that Ashley was simply another new attendant eager to prove herself. She asked questions about beverage service timing, about how to handle passengers who snapped, about when to reset the cabin lights. She laughed easily at Michael's dry jokes, complimented Diane on her polished hair bun, and followed Sandra into the galley to help with trays. But Naomi noticed details. Ashley's tablet was always open, always recording something. She typed even during casual conversation. Her crew badge gleamed, the plastic slightly thicker than standard issue, and once, during a lull in service, Naomi caught a glimpse of the faintest shimmer beneath the laminate. A microphone. Most people would not have noticed, but Naomi had worn the same kind of gear years earlier when she briefed Congress on anti-discrimination cases. She knew exactly what a hidden mic looked like. That night, back in her apartment, Naomi ran Ashley's name through her encrypted database. The search yielded almost nothing. No lawsuits, no social media footprint, no personal articles. Too clean, except for one detail: Ashley Monroe, recipient of the Monroe Aviation Scholarship, 2020. Naomi's breath stilled. Monroe, the name triggered memory. She pulled up archived board rosters. There it was, Calvin Monroe, former chairman of Carter Airlines. He had retired the year before Naomi became CEO, loudly opposing her appointment. Too young, too radical, too unproven. His words had been coded but unmistakable. She did not belong. Now, his granddaughter was on Naomi's crew, armed with a hidden microphone, smiling too brightly to be innocent. This was no coincidence. The next day, Ashley moved like a shadow attached to Naomi. She volunteered to work the same aisle, mirrored her service steps, lingered close during interactions with passengers of color. When Naomi adjusted a coat, Ashley noted the time. When Naomi offered a drink, Ashley leaned in to hear the tone of her voice. "During one service," Ashley asked casually, "don't you think that gentleman in 3B was kind of entitled? I mean, some passengers expect too much." "Right?" Naomi smiled softly. "Every passenger deserves dignity." Ashley tilted her head, her fingers tapping her tablet. "Of course. I just wonder if sometimes we overdo it." Naomi did not bite. Later that evening, Naomi recorded her reflections into her encrypted device. Ashley Monroe is not here to serve. She is here to observe, likely feeding information to someone outside, possibly Calvin Monroe, possibly aligned with Mark Reynolds. Purpose bait me into breaking protocol. She paused, then added, "I will not be baited." On their third flight together, Naomi decided to test Ashley. During a quiet moment in the galley, she leaned closer and whispered as though sharing a secret. "Have you noticed the manifests? Some names are marked, some are not. I think Mark may have been misusing his influence. Keep an eye out." Ashley's smile froze for a fraction of a second. Then she nodded quickly. "Good to know. I will watch." She turned away too fast, her shoulders stiff. Naomi knew she had taken the bait. The real confrontation came days later on a flight to New York. The cabin was tense before boarding even began. Diane's lips were pursed, Sandra's hands fidgeted, and Michael kept muttering about witch hunts. Ashley, unusually quiet, tapped constantly on her tablet. During boarding, Naomi noticed something. In seat 3D sat Dr. Malcolm Hart again. He looked up when Naomi greeted him, recognition flickering in his eyes. "Back with us, Ms. Williams." Naomi smiled warmly. "Always an honor. Dr. Hart, may I offer you a pre-departure drink?" He nodded, visibly relieved to be acknowledged. Naomi poured his sparkling water with steady hands. Ashley lingered nearby, tablet tilted at just the right angle to capture the moment. Later in the flight, when Dr. Hart asked for an extra bread roll, Diane began to repeat Mark's old line. "We are out." Naomi moved smoothly, retrieved the roll, and placed it on Dr. Hart's tray. Ashley's eyes tracked every motion, her stylus tapping rapidly on the screen. After service, Ashley followed Naomi into the galley. "Hey," she said lightly, "aren't you worried about contradicting senior attendants? It looks like you're trying to be, I don't know, a hero." Naomi's gaze was calm. Doing the right thing is not about being a hero. It is about being human. Ashley's smile flickered, almost cracking. Then she laughed too loudly. "Sure, of course, just curious." Naomi leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Off the record, Ashley, do you ever feel like some of us are being watched?" Ashley's eyes widened just for a second. Then she forced another smile. "That is a strange question." Naomi let the silence stretch before answering. "Yes, strange." Back in her apartment that night, Naomi replayed the day in her mind. Ashley was not just observing. She was building a case, a file that could be twisted into a narrative, just like the falsified portal logs. Naomi felt the familiar heat of anger rise, but she pressed it down. Rage was a luxury she could not afford. Patience was her weapon. She called her mother on the encrypted line. "Ashley Monroe is Calvin's granddaughter. She is embedded on my crew, recording everything." Her mother's voice was calm but grave. "Then she is not just a spy. She is a chess piece. They are building a strategy against you. I will not give them what they want," Naomi said firmly. Her mother paused. "Then you must prepare to flip the board." The words echoed long after the call ended. The next morning, Naomi walked into the crew lounge as if nothing had changed. She smiled faintly at Sandra, greeted Michael with polite warmth, ignored Diane's scowl, and nodded at Ashley's bright, calculated smile. Inside, however, Naomi's resolve hardened. She was no longer simply enduring. She was countering. Ashley thought she was watching Naomi, but Naomi was watching her right back. The air inside the crew lounge that morning was heavier than usual. Conversations whispered, silences stretched too long, and every glance carried suspicion. Naomi felt it the moment she stepped through the frosted doors. She adjusted her uniform calmly, her expression unreadable. Diane sat perched at the table, arms folded, smirk sharp as glass. Sandra hovered nearby, twisting the strap of her bag nervously. Michael leaned against the wall, sipping coffee like a man drowning slowly, and Ashley, fresh-faced and cheerful, tapped notes into her tablet with just a little too much focus. Mark Reynolds might have been gone, but his presence lingered like turbulence long after clear skies. The briefing began. A supervisor rattled off assignments quickly before disappearing. Naomi was in first class again. Class. Diane pursed her lips, clearly displeased, but said nothing. Ashley's eyes brightened as though she had just been handed front row seats to a play. Naomi reviewed the manifest. Her eyes paused at seat 3D, Dr. Malcolm Hart again. Fate had placed him back in her cabin. A returning passenger who had seen too much of the unspoken hierarchy. She inhaled slowly. If there was a moment the cracks in this system would be fully exposed, this was it. Boarding unfolded in patterns she knew too well. Mark's ghost still guided them. Diane lavished attention on white executives, their names sung like hymns. Mr. Livingston, welcome back. Scotch waitin' for you. Ms. Denton, I saved your preferred seat. Then came Dr. Hart. Diane barely raised her eyes. 3D, left side. No warmth, no name. Naomi stepped forward with calm grace. Dr. Hart, welcome aboard. May I offer you a pre-departure drink? We have a citrus spritzer or sparkling water this morning. His eyes flickered, relief mixed with recognition. The spritzer. Thank you. As Naomi prepared the drink, she felt Ashley's gaze like a laser at her back. Stylus tapping against the tablet, recording every move. The first half of the flight passed in uneasy silence. Naomi poured wine, delivered meals, adjusted blankets. Sandra shadowed her cautiously, watching more than speaking. Diane maintained her frosty demeanor, her smiles only reserved for select passengers. Michael stayed buried in the galley, and Ashley hovered, always nearby, tilting her badge slightly as if capturing invisible sound. The break came during meal service. Dr. Hart requested an extra bread roll, polite and unassuming. Diane intercepted. Sorry, we're out. Naomi's head turned. She had counted the rolls herself. There were more. She moved to the galley, retrieved one, warmed it gently, and placed it on Dr. Hart's tray with a soft smile. Here you are, Dr. Hart. Fresh. Thank you, he said, his gratitude quiet but weighty. Ashley's stylus tapped furiously. Diane's eyes burned, and then Diane's voice cut through the cabin, sharp and cold. Williams, you need to stop undermining your senior crew. Passengers turned their heads. Forks hovered midair. Naomi straightened, her tone even. I am not undermining anyone. I am ensuring a passenger receives the meal they requested. Diane's voice rose. You are reckless. You think you can bend the rules just to impress? Naomi's gaze was calm, steady. Dignity is not bending the rules, it is fulfilling them. The silence that followed was louder than shouting. Passengers stared, wide-eyed. Sandra froze, caught between loyalty and truth. Michael looked away. Ashley's stylus stopped tapping, her eyes wide, as if savoring the spectacle. The tension should have ended there, but Diane pressed harder. She stepped closer, her voice sharp enough to cut. You are not fit for first class. You do not belong here. People like you never do. The words dropped like a stone into the cabin. A few passengers gasped. One man muttered under his breath. Dr. Hart lowered his gaze, his lips pressed tight. Naomi did not flinch. Inside, her heart pounded, not with fear, but with fire. Her hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of restraint. She had endured 3 months of coded slights, of subtle exclusions, but this was no longer subtle. She met Diane's glare head-on, her voice quiet but cutting. Respect is not optional, and it is not yours to deny. The cabin air went cold. For a moment, no one moved. Then Sandra stepped forward, her voice shaky but audible. She is right. Dr. Hart is diamond status. He deserves equal service. Diane's face twisted. Stay out of this. Sandra. But the damage was done. Passengers were watching, listening. One woman in 2A raised her phone slightly. Recording. A man in 4C leaned forward, whispering to his seatmate. The silence had cracked. The rest of the flight unfolded in tense fragments. Diane sulked, performing only the bare minimum. Sandra moved quietly, but her courage had already shifted the balance. Michael avoided eye contact, and Ashley smiled sweetly. But her notes grew longer, her questions sharper. "Naomi," she said softly in the galley, voice laced with false innocence. "Don't you worry, they're going to twist this, I mean. It almost looked like you lost control back there." Naomi looked at her, eyes calm as still water. "Control is not silence, Ashley. It is choosing when to speak." Ashley blinked, then smiled too quickly. "Of course. Just checking." By the time they landed at LaGuardia, the cabin buzzed with whispers. Passengers glanced between Naomi and Diane, their expressions unsettled, curious. Naomi kept her composure, thanking each traveler as they disembarked. "Doctor," Hart paused at the door, meeting her eyes. "You should not have to fight for what is already promised," he said quietly. Naomi gave a small nod. "Neither should you." That evening, Naomi returned to her apartment, drained but steady. She placed her bag down, sat on the edge of the bed, and let the silence stretch. She thought of Diane's words, sharp and deliberate, and the way passengers had frozen in shock. She thought of Sandra's shaky but brave defense, and the way Ashley had smiled while documenting every second. Her chest tightened. This was the breaking point. The moment when Shadow stopped whispering and began shouting, the system was exposing itself. Her encrypted device buzzed, a message from Cassandra Ellis. "You held your ground. Good. But be ready. They will not stop." Naomi closed her eyes. She was ready. More than ready. The game had changed, and the cabin was no longer just a stage. It was evidence. The rain had followed Naomi from the airport to her apartment, tapping against the windows like an insistent rhythm. She sat at her desk, uniform jacket draped over the chair, her encrypted tablet glowing faintly in the dim light. The confrontation with Diane replayed in her mind again and again. The tone, the words, the passengers who froze in disbelief. The way Ashley smiled as though cataloging every breath. She knew it now. They were no longer just testing her. They were building a case. A soft knock at her door startled her. She approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. No one, just an envelope on the floor, rain-speckled and unmarked. Naomi picked it up, hands steady despite the weight she felt pressing on her chest. Inside was a small flash drive. No note, no signature. She plugged it into her encrypted laptop, her breath shallow. Folders appeared instantly, labeled by dates and flight numbers. Inside each were video files. Naomi clicked the first. Grainy footage filled the screen, showing the galley of her last flight. The angle was high, tucked somewhere near the paneling. Audio was clear enough to catch Diane's cutting words. "People like you never belong here." Naomi froze. The camera had captured everything. Not just Diane's voice, but Sandra's hesitant defense. Passengers shifting uncomfortably. Ashley's tablet angled like a mirror. She clicked another file. More footage, this time from weeks earlier. Mark leaning into the galley, whispering instructions to Diane about which passengers deserved extra attention. His smirk visible as he said, "The rest, just keep it cold. They will get the message." Her stomach twisted. This was surveillance, systematic and deliberate. Someone had hidden cameras in the cabins. She pressed play on a third file and felt her skin prickle. It was herself, sitting alone in the crew quarters, typing into her journal. The timestamp matched the day she had been accused of accessing passenger records. Her throat tightened. This was how they had fabricated the logs. They had filmed her, stolen her image, then doctored the evidence. She sat back, palms pressed against her eyes, the weight of it all pressed down hard. Anger, betrayal, and beneath it a flicker of vindication. If cameras existed, then proof existed, and proof could not be erased. Her encrypted device buzzed. A message from Cassandra Ellis. "We are close. Do not react. Document everything. The board will authorize an emergency review soon. Stay steady." Naomi exhaled slowly. Steady. That was her strength. The next morning, the crew lounge felt like a theater before a show. Diane avoided Naomi's eyes, her smile brittle and strained. Sandra's gaze lingered on Naomi, quiet but supportive. Michael fidgeted, unable to mask his discomfort, and Ashley was radiant, chirping greetings, her tablet ready as always. The assignment placed Naomi once more in first class, this time with Ashley directly shadowing her. Diane smirked as if enjoying the setup. Sandra hesitated, glancing between them, and Michael sighed heavily. On board, Naomi felt Ashley's presence like a shadow she could not shake. Every time Naomi adjusted a tray, Ashley leaned close. Every time Naomi greeted a passenger, Ashley tilted her badge slightly. Naomi's instinct screamed that Ashley was not just recording. She was baiting her, testing how far Naomi would go before breaking protocol. Halfway through the flight, Ashley made her move. She leaned close in the galley, voice soft and conspiratorial. "Naomi, don't you think Dr. Hart expects too much, I mean? Some passengers just push it because of who they are." The words were laced with venom, sweetened with innocence. A trap disguised as casual conversation. Naomi looked at her, eyes calm. Every passenger deserves dignity. That is the job. Ashley blinked, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second. Then she recovered, laughing lightly. "Of course. I just wondered if you ever felt that way." Naomi let the silence stretch. Then she spoke softly, her voice steady. "Ashley, you should be careful what you record. Sometimes microphones capture more than what you want them to." Ashley stiffened. Her fingers froze on the tablet. She forced another laugh, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of panic. Naomi turned away, hiding the faintest smile. The seed was planted. When the flight landed, passengers disembarked quickly. Dr. Hart paused once again, thanking Naomi warmly. "You remind me of why I stayed loyal to this airline for so long," he said. "Loyalty should not require endurance," Naomi replied gently. That evening, Naomi called her mother using the secure line. "I found surveillance," she whispered, "hidden cameras, dozens of files. They have been watching everything." Her mother's voice was firm. "Then they have trapped themselves. Use their own weapons against them." "I need corroboration," Naomi said, "something no one can dismiss as fabricated. Then find someone who was part of it, but no longer afraid." Her mother answered. Naomi leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Could Sandra be that person? Or perhaps someone who had left the system already? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock. This time, when she opened the door, a woman stood there, late 50s, hair streaked with gray, posture upright despite the wear of years. "You don't know me," the woman said quietly. "My name is Donna Keller. I used to run rotations under Mark until I aged out, as he liked to say." Naomi's breath caught. She stepped aside. "Come in." Donna entered, clutching a small envelope. Her voice was low, cautious. "I heard what happened on your last flight. What Diane said. I was not surprised. I have something." She handed Naomi the envelope. Inside was a USB drive. I started recording Mark years ago. Donna continued. Not official, just for insurance. He deleted incident reports, manipulated service records. I kept audio files, hundreds of hours. I wanted to protect myself. But now, she paused, meeting Naomi's eyes. Now I want to protect the truth. Naomi plugged the drive into her laptop. Audio files appeared in a long list. She clicked the first. Mark's voice filled the room. 3 C's a downgrade. Do not waste time. Focus on Livingston. He is worth 6 figures in tips. Another clip. Passengers of color in first. Do the minimum. If they complain, they are already looking for trouble. Another. Diane's voice. I don't mind as long as no one from upstairs watches. And then Regina Winters, the training director. You are lucky HR is on our side. This will never touch us. Naomi's hands trembled, not with fear, but with fury. This was it. Proof undeniable. Voices caught in their own arrogance. She looked at Donna, her throat tight. Why now, Donna's eyes softened, because I was waiting for someone who would not bury it again. Someone who would not look away. Naomi swallowed hard. Thank you. That night, she encrypted the footage and the recordings, packaging them with her own findings. She sent them to Elise Tanaka, Cassandra Ellis, and the Civil Rights Council contact her mother had arranged. The subject line was Simple Comprehensive Evidence Package. She hit send. Then she sat in the quiet of her apartment, listening to the rain again. For the first time in months, her heart felt steady. The exposure had begun. The morning of Flight 2201 began with a silence so sharp it felt deliberate. Naomi walked through the crew lounge with her shoulders squared, her Navy uniform pressed to perfection. But this time, there was no alias on her badge. The plastic rectangle glimmered with her true name. Naomi Carter, Executive Vice President, Aviora Airlines. Whispers rippled through the room. Sandra stood immediately, recognition flashing in her eyes. Michael's gaze dropped to the floor, guilt painted across his features. Diane froze mid-sentence, her expression collapsing from disdain to disbelief. And at the center of it all stood Mark Reynolds, reinstated temporarily while under investigation, arms folded, smirk still clinging stubbornly to his face. Well, he said slowly, lips curling, the prodigal executive returns. Naomi did not blink. Let's begin the briefing. They gathered around the table. Ashley sat with her tablet poised, but for the first time her smile faltered. Naomi opened her binder, her voice calm and deliberate. This is Flight 2201, ATL 2ORD. Estimated duration, 1 hour 57 minutes. Weather clear, no turbulence expected. She paused, scanning each face. We will also be operating under direct observation today. Senior leadership, independent federal monitors, and undisclosed media personnel are on board. Diane's head snapped around. What? Mark's smirk faltered. Naomi continued. Several of our passengers today are Aviora stakeholders, civil rights observers, federal aviation representatives. The cabin will not be staged. It will be lived, and every second will be witnessed. Michael shifted uneasily in his chair. Sandra nodded once, slow but resolute. Ashley's stylus tapped nervously against the edge of her tablet. Mark stood, his voice sharp. You are not leading this flight. I am. Naomi tilted her head slightly. Correction. You were. She slid a folded sheet across the table. Effective immediately. Mark Reynolds, Your clearance is revoked. Your employment is terminated under Title Non-Violation Proceedings and the Federal Aviation Equal Treatment Mandate." Mark laughed, short and bitter. "You can't fire me mid-flight briefing. That's not how this works." The lounge door opened. 2 federal marshals stepped inside, uniforms crisp, expressions flat. One simply gestured to the door, "This way, sir." Mark's smirk collapsed. He glanced around the room, searching for support. Diane looked away. Ashley's eyes widened, panic flickering in her mask. Sandra stayed steady, her gaze locked on Naomi. Without another word, the marshals escorted Mark Reynolds out. The room was silent. Naomi turned. "Diane Murray. Effective immediately. You are placed under review for complicity in systemic discriminatory practices. You will not be flying today." Diane stood, fists clenched. "You set us up." "No," Naomi replied, her voice calm but edged with steel. "You set yourself up. I just brought the mirror." Security entered quietly, escorting Diane away. Her muttered curses faded down the hall. Only Sandra, Michael, and Ashley remained. Naomi looked at them. "You still have a choice. You can continue in silence, or you can rebuild with truth." Sandra's voice was clear, steady. "I want to start again, the right way." Michael swallowed hard. "Same." Naomi nodded and handed them new briefing packets. Clean slates. A new first-class service philosophy titled "Equal Excellence, No Exceptions." Ashley stayed silent. Her fingers twitched around the tablet. Naomi's eyes met hers. For the first time, Ashley looked away. Boarding began like any other flight, but the cabin carried a different weight. Naomi moved through the gate with calm authority, greeting passengers warmly. Some looked twice at her badge, recognizing the name. Others whispered quietly, curiosity sparking behind their eyes. In seat 1A sat a civil rights attorney, traveling anonymously. In 2C, a journalist known for investigative exposés. In 3D, a board member who had once questioned Naomi's rise. Scattered throughout economy were others federal observers, hidden but watchful. The stage was set. During service, Naomi led by example. She greeted every passenger by name, explained meal options with care, and delivered each tray with dignity. Sandra followed closely, her confidence growing with every interaction. Michael stayed focused, efficient, respectful, and Ashley, hovering at the edge, typed furiously but avoided Naomi's eyes. The true test came halfway through the flight. A black woman in her 50s, Diamond member, requested a special meal she had pre-ordered. Ashley hesitated, glancing at the manifest. The tray was there, stocked, but Naomi saw the flicker of calculation in her eyes, the hesitation drilled into her by months under Mark's shadow. Naomi stepped forward, her voice even. "Dr. Lewis, here is your meal, prepared exactly as ordered. Thank you for your loyalty." The passenger smiled, touched. "It's been a long time since I felt seen on this airline." Ashley's cheeks flushed. She typed quickly, her mask cracking. Naomi leaned slightly closer, her voice quiet but firm. "Write the truth, Ashley, because it will outlive the lies." Ashley froze, then lowered her stylus. The rest of the flight unfolded like a slow unveiling. Passengers whispered among themselves, watching as service played out evenly, consistently, respectfully. No coded glances, no subtle exclusions, just hospitality. As the plane began its descent into Chicago, the captain made an announcement. His voice was steady, but the words carried weight. Ladies and gentlemen, this flight has been under special observation today. We are proud to recognize that Aviora Airlines is committing to new standards of equity and dignity for every passenger. The cabin buzzed. A few passengers clapped softly, some nodded, understanding more had happened than what was said aloud. After landing, Naomi stood at the front of the cabin as passengers disembarked. The civil rights attorney in 1A gave her a quiet nod. The journalist in 2C whispered, "This story will change everything." The board member in 3D paused, meeting her eyes. "I was wrong about you," he said. Naomi offered a faint smile. "I wasn't here to prove you wrong. I was here to prove what's right." When the last passenger left, Naomi gathered with her crew in the empty cabin. The silence felt different now, lighter, charged with possibility. Sandra spoke first. "You showed us it doesn't have to be this way. I want to be part of that change." Michael nodded. "Me too. I stayed quiet too long." Naomi looked at them both. "Then we begin today. Equal excellence. No exceptions." Ashley stood apart, her tablet clutched tightly. For the first time, she looked uncertain. Her voice was quiet, almost vulnerable. "What happens to me?" Naomi studied her. "That depends. Do you want to be part of truth or part of the past?" Ashley's eyes glistened, her shoulders slumped. I don't know." "Then decide," Naomi said softly, "because history already has." That evening, Naomi entered the boardroom in Chicago. Cassandra Ellis was waiting, flanked by federal officials and senior leaders. Naomi laid the recordings on the table audio files of Mark and Diane. Surveillance footage from hidden cameras, service logs, passenger complaints. The evidence was undeniable, layered, and irrefutable. Silence followed as the board absorbed it all. Finally, one man who had once doubted Naomi cleared his throat. "I am ashamed." Naomi's voice was steady. "I am not here for apologies. I am here for accountability." The motion passed unanimously. Mark Reynolds and Diane Murray were permanently terminated. Regina Winters was suspended pending formal dismissal. A full federal ethics audit of Aviora's operations was authorized. A Service Equity Council was established with Naomi at its head. The reckoning had come. Naomi left the boardroom that night with her head high, the city lights of Chicago glowing against the glass tower. For the first time in months, she felt the weight shifting not off her shoulders, but off the passengers who had carried it quietly for too long. The skies would no longer belong to silence. The weeks after the Chicago board session unfolded like a storm breaking into sunlight. Aviora Airlines, once silent about the whispers of discrimination, now buzzed with change. Internal memos turned into public declarations. Quiet promises transformed into binding policies. Naomi Carter stood at the center of it all, not as an undercover attendant, but as herself, an executive whose truth had reshaped the skies. The first visible reform came quickly. A new service charter was posted in every terminal and on every aircraft. In bold, clear print, it read "Equal excellence, no exceptions." Passengers noticed, crew noticed, and, perhaps most importantly, those who once believed silence was safety began to find their voices. Mark Reynolds had been escorted out of the company in disgrace. Federal charges awaited him for unlawful surveillance and falsified records. Diane Murray vanished quietly, her exit letter terse and bitter. Regina Winters, once untouchable, faced formal dismissal, and in the empty spaces they left behind, Something new grew. Sandra Patel was promoted to senior lead attendant after scoring the highest marks in anonymous passenger evaluations. Michael Levine joined a new internal council on service ethics, his once restless silence now replaced with thoughtful advocacy. Even Ashley Monroe, once the eyes and ears of an old guard plotting Naomi's fall, asked for a second chance. She sat across from Naomi one evening, her voice trembling. "I was raised in a system that told me loyalty meant obedience," Ashley said, "but I see now that I was being used. If you'll let me, I want to be part of fixing what I helped break." Naomi studied her carefully. She saw regret, yes, but also sincerity. "Then your penance," Naomi said softly, "is truth. Every time, no matter the cost." Ashley nodded, tears threatening to spill. For the first time, Naomi believed her. The ripples of change traveled beyond Aviora. The Civil Rights Council released a statement commending the airline's reforms as a model for the industry. Federal monitors announced new standards for airline service equity across the country. Passengers of color, long resigned to quiet indignities, began to share stories of small but powerful shifts, warm greetings, attentive service, a seat that felt like it truly belonged to them. Naomi flew often during those months, not in first class, but unannounced in uniform, side by side with crew. Some recognized her, some did not. She preferred it that way. Service, she believed, was never about the title on a badge. It was about intention. One evening, as she walked through a terminal in Dallas, a man stopped her, middle-aged, wearing a tailored gray suit. His eyes lit with recognition. "You won't remember me," he said, "but years ago, you served me wine when someone else told me it was unavailable. That moment stayed with me." Naomi smiled softly. "I remember more than you think, Dr. Porter." He chuckled. "Then let me say this. You didn't just change an airline. You gave it a soul." The words lingered with her long after he walked away. Nearly a year after her undercover journey began, Naomi made a choice. She would fly one last time in uniform, not as a disguise, but as a farewell, a way to close the circle where it had begun. It was Flight 1142 from Atlanta to New York, the same route that had once nearly broken her spirit, the same skies where coffee had been thrown, where humiliation had been staged. Now, it would become her final chapter as a crew member. She arrived early, walking the length of the aircraft in silence. Her fingers trailed across the seats, the galley doors, the overhead bins. Every surface carried a memory pain, endurance, resilience, but also, now, redemption. The crew for the flight included Sandra, now confident in her leadership, and Michael, steadier than she had ever seen him. Ashley was not flying that day, but she had sent a note wishing Naomi luck. Even Donna Keller, the woman whose recordings had exposed so much, sat quietly in row 4A as a passenger. No badge, no role, just presence. Boarding moved smoothly. Families, business travelers, students, elders. Passengers glanced at Naomi, some recognizing her name, some not. She treated them all the same, her voice warm, her gestures precise. During ascent, she helped an elderly woman stow her cane, reassured a nervous teenager flying alone, and poured drinks with the same calm care she had shown in her very first training drills. Every motion was intentional but effortless. There was no performance now, only presence. Halfway through the flight, a passenger in 3D, a black man in a tailored suit, looked at her closely. "Forgive me," "But are you her?" he asked. Naomi raised an eyebrow. "Her, the one who changed everything here." Naomi Carter. She smiled faintly. "Depends who's asking." "Dr. William Porter," he said, offering his hand. "I have flown more than 40 times this year. The difference is night and day. You didn't just expose injustice. You rebuilt trust." Naomi shook his hand, warmth in her eyes. Better skies belong to everyone. That was always the point. The captain made an announcement near the end of the flight. His voice was formal, but his tone carried pride. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to recognize one of our crew today. Executive Vice President Naomi Carter is flying her final rotation in uniform. Her leadership has shaped not only Aviora Airlines but the aviation industry as a whole." Applause spread through the cabin. Some passengers stood. A woman in 1A clapped with tears in her eyes. A young man in 4F whispered, "That's her." Naomi bowed her head slightly. She didn't need to speak. Her silence carried more than 1,000 speeches. Upon landing, the terminal was quiet. No media circus, no flashing cameras. But lining the ramp were dozens of Aviora employees, ground crew, attendants, pilots, each wearing a small pin on their lapels. Equal excellence, no exceptions. Naomi hugged Sandra tightly, shook Michael's hand, and embraced Donna with quiet gratitude. Then she turned back toward the aircraft, placing her palm gently on the Aviora logo painted near the door. It was not just metal and paint. It was memory, history, and transformation. Weeks later, her office on the 58th floor remained uncluttered. She never liked decorations, only wide windows and the endless sky. But on her desk now sat a single shadow box, holding 3 objects: her first ID badge as Naomi Collins, her folded passenger respect charter, and a wine-stained napkin from Dr. Porter's tray, symbols of humility, change, and service. At an International Aviation Ethics Summit 6 months later, Naomi was invited to speak. She stood without notes, her voice quiet but steady. "I am not here because of a title," she said. "I am here because silence almost destroyed the thing I loved most, an airline meant to connect people. We forgot that how we connect matters as much as that we connect." She let the silence stretch, then continued. "Excellence that only extends to some is not excellence. It is elitism. Dignity is not a privilege. It is a standard. And if we choose it every day, the skies will always belong to everyone." The room rose in standing ovation. Naomi didn't smile, not fully. She simply let the echo of truth fill the space. 1 year later, passengers boarded Flight 1142 again. Different crew, different faces, but the same charter hung in the galley: equal excellence, no exceptions. They took their seats without glances of doubt, without quiet calculations of belonging, and above them, the aircraft lifted into the open sky, carrying with it the legacy Naomi Carter had fought to restore. Not a legacy of power, but of intention. Because justice, she knew, had never been about altitude. It had always been about belonging at 35,000 feet. The sky was never the same after Naomi Carter's final flight. What began as humiliation and silence ended as transformation and truth. She showed the world that discrimination doesn't always scream, it whispers. It hides in routines, in mistakes, in systems that pretend to be neutral. But when exposed, it trembles, and when challenged, it falls. This story isn't just about one executive who went undercover. It's about every passenger who has ever wondered if they truly belonged. It's about every worker who stayed quiet out of fear. and it's about the courage it takes to turn silence into change. Naomi's fight reminds us that respect is not a luxury seat, it is a right. Justice is not handed out, it is earned, defended, and lived. And dignity belongs to everyone who dares to step on board. So, as you leave this story, ask yourself, what would you do if you witnessed injustice in the skies, or anywhere would you stay silent? Or would you be the one to bring the mirror? If Naomi's story moved you, help us keep these voices alive. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that expose, inspire, and transform. The next flight is waiting.